Hello everybody and welcome back to another Marvel Crisis Protocol character spotlight. And today we are taking a look at Mr. Skurge, the Executioner. And yeah, we're going to go ahead and jump right into things here. So, starting things out, Skurge is coming in with a 4-3-2 defensive line and 6 stamina, so nothing too crazy there. We have a kind of obvious strong side and an obvious weak side here. But, you know, that's pretty standard for the 3 threat that he's coming in here. And then he's a size 2 medium mover, so nothing too crazy so far. Then we get into his attacks, and these are a little bit more on the unique side. First of all, he has his Battle Axe. This is a range 2 6 dice physical attack, and it's going to gain you 1 power, so, you know, you kind of get a little bit of extra dice on it than a typical 3 threat, but it's only going to gain you 1 even if you do some extra damage with that, so, yep, I like when they do that as kind of a balancing mechanic. And it's got the Wild Bleed to hand out that condition there, and yeah, I mean, that's a nice condition to just kind of have tacked on there. It's already a pretty good kind of free attack as it is, so yeah, certainly not bad. Then we move to a spender, which is the Executioner. This is going to be a 4-cost range 3 8 dice, also physical attack, so we're all on one side here. And if the target character has the bleed condition, which of course he's trying to give out with his gainer there, you can reroll up to 2 attack dice during this attack. So 8 dice with 2 rerolls does hit pretty hard. And then it's got a wild bleed as well, so if they weren't already, you can throw it on with this. Although most of the time, I think you're better off waiting until you put the bleed out to use the spender, unless you're kind of in the desperate situation where you really need to drop something and you're on your last action or something like that. So, yeah. Really solid there. I mean, it's very straightforward. It's just damage, but 8 dice with 2 rerolls for 4 power is pretty solid as long as you've already got that bleed going. So definitely a really important part of his kit there. Next, he has Storm Giant Strength. This is a 3-cost active superpower that lets you choose an interactive terrain feature, size 3 or less within range 2, and throw it small. This is just going to be good for throwing some extra damage out there, and yeah, I mean, size 3, so that can do a lot of work. Unfortunately, the way his kit is designed is you can't double Spender and Storm Giant Strength in the same turn, unless you have ways of kind of gaining extra power midway through the turn, but still can be definitely a nice way of getting some extra damage in there, and you know, size 3 will hit pretty hard. So yeah, definitely nice for him to have. Unfortunately, not a character throw, so no control on this model here, but again, just some more damage because he is a very hard hitting 3 threat here. He also does have a little bit of defensive things as well, not necessarily in terms of staying alive, but in terms of keeping your team alive, and that is with Right Hand Man. This is a 2-cost reactive superpower that says when an enemy character within range 2 of this character targets another allied character with an attack, he may use this superpower, and he becomes the target of the attack regardless of range and line of sight. So it's a taunt, and I love taunts, so I do love this for him. Good way for him to gain some extra power as well, just kind of being a gainer only character. Gaining power can definitely be a little bit of a slower thing for him, so being able to kind of eat some attacks here and there is definitely a good way to kind of boost his power generation. So yeah, not bad. He is not the most defensive model in the world, so something to kind of keep in mind with that is, you know, definitely don't expect him to survive too much if you're using this frequently. But you know, he's got a good physical defense stat, so he's not gonna drop too quickly, short of dice being dice. But you know, if you're right hand manning into spenders or mystic attacks or things like that, he is just gonna drop. So got to keep that in mind. But still, sometimes it's worth doing just to save another model that might be more important for whatever reason. So yeah, really nice superpower to have on his kit, but just kind of keep in mind that you know, he is hitting pretty hard, so making sure he gets to do his turn before he starts using this is not a bad idea either. Next, he does have aggressive, and you can kind of play with that and right hand man to do some cool things. So after an attack targeting him is resolved, if he suffered damage, he gets to advance towards the attacking character. And yeah, this is great. This helps him kind of get a little bit of extra mobility in there, and you know, you can really line up some neat things with right hand man and aggressive. Being able to kind of aggressive when they're really not expecting you to be able to can be really neat, and you know, just great for, hey, suddenly I'm standing on this point or something like that. So yeah, really solid thing to have in his kit here. And then last but not least, he is an Asgardian, so he has during the power phase gain 1 additional power, and that's really going to help him out. That means the Executioner is online much more consistently. By round 2 you have it guaranteed unless you picked something up or something like that, but If you have picked something up, then you have Storm Giant Strength. So, yeah, just really, really solid. Also means you have Right Hand Man available every round, so that's also just really, really good. So, yeah, he definitely appreciates that. Having only a gainer, that definitely boosts his power generation a fair bit as well. Taking a look really briefly at the flip side here, the only thing that really changes is the art, and he does lose 1 point of stamina, so he's a little bit squishier on the flip side. And with no real kind of self-defensive tech on his card here, you're definitely going to want to be somewhat careful with him and when he's getting attacks thrown his way, because the 4 physical is solid, but it's not gonna last very long against more than 2 or 3 attacks even on the physical side. Will probably wear him down pretty quickly. So definitely something you want to watch out for, and of course beware of mystic heavy teams or just characters in general. But still, he's got a really, really solid kind of stat line here, and he's got some great attacks. So yeah, he provides a really cool kind of beat stick / occasional bodyguard role, and I think he's a really, really fun model to play on the table. But with that said, we're going to go ahead and move into tactics cards here, where he actually has 3 tactics cards available to him. The first one is going to be Meet My Executioner. Now, this is his team-up card with Enchantress, and I actually really, really like this card. So this is an unaffiliated reactive card that says when an allied non-Skurge character would suffer a collision, an allied Enchantress may spend 2 power to play this card. Place an allied Skurge within range 1 of the character suffering a collision. Skurge suffers the collision instead. With his 4 physical defense, he's generally alright at that. And during this collision, if he would suffer damage, reduce the amount suffered by 1. So this card is really, really neat. I mean, it requires both Enchantress and Skurge, but you don't necessarily have to play it on Enchantress suffering the collision. It can be on when your opponent throws anything. But basically, it's just the main reason why you would want to do this is, A, of course, you eat the collision for that character, you reduce the damage on it, you have good physical defense, so in theory, it's not too bad for Skurge. And then he's going to be well up the board and able to kind of get in with his own attacks, because that is one thing he's kind of missing, is aside from aggressive, which your opponent often will have to willingly trigger, you don't really have many ways of kind of getting into position if you've been put out of it. So, yeah, Meet My Executioner is a great way of kind of being like, well, he's here, he's in the fight again. So yeah, it's a really, really cool card. In terms of actually coming up, I mean, Enchantress doesn't see a crazy amount of play these days, unfortunately, so I don't think this card gets seen all that much in a competitive sense, but I do think it's a solid card if you're running Enchantress anyways. It's definitely a really fun, fluffy card for the two to have, and I do think it does a lot for Skurge, so if you're running both characters, it's definitely worth considering. It's just, yeah, unfortunately, Enchantress doesn't see the table as much as she used to these days. Still, I don't think she's a bad model at all, so if you're bringing the card, or if you're bringing the model, I think the card is strongly worth considering. The next card here is Scuttlebutt on Me. This is shared with Beta Ray Bill. Either of them could use this. So it's an unaffiliated reactive card that says when an allied Beta Ray Bill or Skurge makes an attack during their activation, after the attack is resolved, they may spend any amount of power to play this card. The attacking character immediately performs the attack list above, targeting the original target character. And this is a range 5 starting at 2 dice attack that's going to be on the energy side, so it is kind of cool there. It gives them an extra attack type. It ignores line of sight, and the defending character does not benefit from cover, and you add an attack dice to the attack roll equal to the power spent to play this card. So if you go ahead and spend 10 power for this, you're going to be throwing a 12 dice attack here. After the attack is resolved, if it dealt damage, the target character that played this card character that played this card may throw the target character small. And yeah, this is a neat card. It's basically like, what if Cruelty had a variable amount of dice and then a throw tacked onto it? And I think it's neat. I don't know if it's necessarily all that great. I certainly like it more on Skurge, who's a little bit more of an attrition piece and kind of using his power mostly for aggression things anyways, than I do with Beta Ray Bill, who personally I find usually wants to keep his power for control or for reducing damage. So I do think it's a pretty solid card. I mean, if you spend, I think Cruelty only costs 2, so if you spend only 2 on it, it is probably worse than Cruelty, but if you spend 3 power on it, it's basically an energy Cruelty that has a throw as long as you deal damage, and if you have more than that to spend on it, then it can be really, really good. So yeah, I definitely like this as a way of kind of being like, hey, this character needs to go down. I think if you're running both Beta Ray and Skurge, it becomes really, really interesting. But yeah, I think most of the time this card ends up sitting at home, but is definitely an interesting card. And I think with Scourge, I mean, Cruelty at the end of the day is a very good card. So I think having access to that kind of outside of Criminal Syndicate, even if it's in a more limited form, being only available to a couple of characters, is still worth considering. So yeah, I do like the idea of this, especially if you're like in Asgard with both characters. Not that they're really hurting for card slots, but yeah, it's definitely a tough one. But I do generally speaking like this card. And lastly, we get to a very fluffy card, the Weapons of Midgard. This is an unaffiliated active card that says during Scourge's activation, he can spend 2 power to play this card, and he may use the attack listed above once this activation. And that attack is a beam for 5 dice, physical attack, no rules text to it, and I don't unfortunately love this card. I think it is a neat idea. It just kind of being like, hey, here is the funny line from the movie, but unfortunately, I just don't think that beam is good enough for 2 power, and you have to use an attack action on it. It's throwing less dice than your regular attack. Now, admittedly, it is beam 4, so you could hit multiple targets, and it certainly outranges everything else on his card, but that's 2 power that could have went towards a spender. That's 2 power that could have went towards objectives or even right hand man. And I don't know, it just doesn't feel worth it to me for a 5 dicer that maybe hits a couple models. Personally, it's not my favorite. I wish they did something a little bit more interesting with this. Maybe give some rules text to destroy here. Not really sure what they would do with it, but yeah, as it is, I think it's just really underwhelming, unfortunately. So yeah, personally, I pass on this one, but if you guys disagree with me, definitely let me know down below. Curious to hear where you guys have managed to make this card work. Next, we are on to affiliations, and he's a member of 2 affiliations here. The first one being Asgard. And yeah, I mean, he's definitely a solid piece in Asgard. He is competing primarily with Valkyrie here for that 3 threat slot. But if you're, or I guess Heimdall as well. I almost forgot about him. Whoops. So he's got a bit of competition there. Generally, I think you can kind of afford to run 2, if not all 3 in your list, but they do have a lot of really good high threat models as well. So yeah, I think he definitely has a spot there as just kind of a hard hitting, occasional taunter model. And again, kind of his main competition there is Valkyrie, whereas Heimdall plays a little bit more of a support role. So yeah, definitely an interesting piece there. As far as the leaderships go, I think he gets a little bit of value out of all of them. I mean, Loki's is pretty solid for him. Being able to reroll some dice is something that he already has a little bit of on the Executioner attack, but getting some more in there is certainly nice for him. He does have to pay power for it, which he doesn't love because his only attack here is a gainer. So that can be a little bit less ideal for him, but still giving him that little bit of extra consistency. And then, of course, defensively, that's really, really nice for him as well. So yeah, he definitely appreciates Loki's. I think Mighty Thor's is probably the one he prefers a little bit more just for the power reason. Even though Mighty Thor doesn't get to give the rerolls quite as frequently, being able to just, when he's using his regular gainer attack, which doesn't have rerolls on its own, and being able to get that one reroll because he's within the range anyways. And then when he's getting attacked from outside of range, just having that native reroll is nice for him. So very similar leaderships in terms of what they actually do for him, but I think he has an easier time using the one that doesn't cost power, even though he doesn't get to use it quite as often. Then we have Thor 2, or Thor 1 here, I almost said Thor 2, where you can have a character spend a power to remove a damage or special condition every round. And yeah, I think he definitely doesn't dislike that. There are some conditions that are really, really annoying for him. Being able to heal up a little bit is nice as well with Right Hand Man, especially if your opponent's a mostly physical team where, 1 health will actually go a little bit further with him. But generally, I think it's probably his least favorite of the 3 leaderships. Still not bad for him, though. I think he can play pretty well under all 3 characters here. Additionally, while you're in Asgard, of course, you have access to Odin's Blessing, which is a card he definitely appreciates. Using that right-hand man, you could always Odin Blessing to guarantee you get to do it twice sort of thing, which is always nice to have that option available to you. And just, for when the spikes come out, you want to be able to have that kind of just emergency reset button there. And then, he's also got a couple models he appreciates here. Enchantress, mainly because they share that card. But, she's also got stuff like Siren's Call, which can be really nice for putting things in range of him. So there's stuff like that is pretty nice. And then Heimdall, giving him a little bit of that consistency we were talking about getting from the leaders there. Being able to reroll some dice from Heimdall's all-seeing eyes here is definitely something he appreciates. So yeah, there's a little bit of synergy in faction with some of the models as well, not just the leaderships, which is definitely nice for him to have. Next, we get to Cabal, his other affiliation, and here he definitely has a little bit tighter competition than he had in Asgard as far as that 3 slot goes. Mainly, though, that competition being in the form of Baron Zemo here, of course, who is really, really good. But if you are running them together, they work pretty well together. Being, both kind of melee-oriented models that want to get up in your opponent's face. Zemo's probably going to get there first most of the time, but then he has access to that strategic genius there, so if you can kind of keep them together, you can use the taunt on Skurge to help keep Zemo alive, and then Skurge is giving him the rerolls to help keep Skurge alive. Really, really nice the way they can kind of work together sometimes. So, yeah, they're definitely a solid duo, and, once again, you have access to Enchantress in affiliation, so there's definitely a few synergies you can kind of play, and he is probably one of the better 3s in the affiliation. Obviously, I don't think very many models can kind of compete with Zemo for that, but if you're going for kind of an attrition-y 3, he's definitely a worthwhile choice there. You've got some other decent options like Hood, or I'm probably missing one or two here. Strucker can hit all right once in a while. You've got some support options in like Mordo or Zola, but actually I think both of those would be pretty solid supports for him. But yeah, I think as far as the 3 slot is concerned, he's definitely a solid pick for it. Going into leaderships here, I think he works pretty well with a lot of these leaderships. We'll just kind of go through them in order here. The first one is Malekith, so it's when you daze or KO enemy characters, you get to advance, heal, and gain power, and he adores this leadership. I mean, movement for him is great. It's one of his biggest downsides is that he doesn't have a crazy amount of mobility. Healing is also pretty solid for him, and then gaining power is great. It's going to let him use his spender more often, let him throw terrain more often. You could use this partway through, or no, you can't use it on the character that got the Days or Chaos. So you can't give him power partway through his turn with this, but still, I think it's a really, really solid leadership for him. So yeah, I definitely think Malekith is a solid choice, and when they start throwing those big attacks into Malekith to try and take him down or put a bunch of conditions on him, being able to right-hand man those is definitely a good idea as well. So yeah, I think it's a great pairing for him. Then we get to Red Skull 1, and I think Red Skull 1 is actually maybe one of his favorite leaderships in this affiliation. Just for every time he damages an enemy character with an attack, after the attack is resolved, he's going to gain 1 power. And yeah, this is really, really solid for him. I mean, he's throwing a 6-dicer, and it's a gainer, so he's probably doing damage most of the time. So being able to gain 2 power to that is absolutely huge for his ability to get that spender going. Basically, it means if he does damage with his gainer attack, and he didn't have to move to get into that position, he can spender every round, which is really, really good for him. So yeah, that's quite nice for him. And then, of course, you have access to Master of the Cube here to kind of place him up the board and things like that. So you still get some of that mobility there, which is definitely nice for him. And Hail Hydra to trigger aggressive as well. I mean, you've already got the taunt, but now you can kind of use that as like a bodyguard sort of thing and have a couple ways of getting into that. So yeah, I think Red Skull 1's probably actually his favorite place in Cabal, but he certainly likes Red Skull 3 as well. He doesn't love spending the power for it, but being able to treat skulls as crits, turns out, is really, really good. So yeah, he definitely appreciates that as well. And then he also has Nothing Is Beyond My Reach here to get him up the board. So again, just, he's kind of getting most of the things he really wants from this Red Skull as well. Lastly, we have Sin, and I mean, Sin's could be worse for him, I suppose, because he does like to be up close and personal, so he is going to be able to roll these dice more frequently, but unfortunately, Sin's leadership is just very, very RNG, so it just doesn't feel that great in general, and doesn't really synergize particularly well with any real type of model. So yeah, unfortunately, not too much to talk about there. But both of the Red Skulls and Malekith are fantastic leaderships for him, and definitely worth considering. As far as splashing him goes, I think he's an interesting splash in a lot of places. I mean, a lot of affiliations already kind of have models that can fill his roles, so, you don't really need to splash him as your model that does damage, because most affiliations already have access to at least one or two models that can do damage. But I think if you're a big fan of the way he plays and you want to splash him places, there are definitely some places that he appreciates a lot, even if they don't necessarily need him. So the big things I think you're looking for when splashing him are going to be things that can make him a little bit more defensively consistent, specifically defensive rerolls, and preferably ones that you don't have to pay power for. Paying power for them is okay, but he's not the most power flooded character in the world, even if he tends to not feel power starved. I don't know if that makes much sense, but basically, he kind of has the right amount of power most of the time to do the things he wants to do, but if he has to pay power for other things, he feels a little less great about that. The other thing that he's good for is mobility. Places where you can make him a little bit more mobile are certainly appreciated. So, I mean, for mobility, the first place you always think of is Midnight Suns, and I don't think he'd be bad there. Of course, he does still have the issue of he has to spend power for that mobility, but still, it's not bad for him. The other thing there is he does synergize nicely with Blade, because they're both going to be throwing out a bunch of bleeds and benefiting from characters that are bleeding. So yeah, I think he's got a little bit of synergy with Blade there as well. And of course, that brings up the idea of Dracula as well. There it is, Thralls of Dracula, where the leadership's not on his card, so that doesn't really help me. But the leadership allows you to pass out a bleed for one power, and or heal if they're already bleeding for one power. And I think that's really, really nice with him. You can kind of set up your spender to be able to get those rerolls every time. And if you've already got the bleed off your builder, you could use it for healing. That sort of thing is certainly nice for him. But kind of back towards the original idea there, things like defensive rerolls for him, like Web Warriors, could be really interesting if you're playing like a more aggressive, fighty Web Warriors. He definitely doesn't play their normal playstyle, but he does appreciate their leadership, so you can kind of go either way with that. And then, of course, the other one that's very similar to Web Warriors, and I'm, for whatever reason, not seeing, there we go, Shield, with the Invaders leadership could be really interesting for him, just kind of being able to have that have that defensive reroll when you're close to your allies. Synergizes with Namor kind of a similar way that he synergizes with Zemo as well. So being able to benefit from that reroll and then keep your leader alive while they're in that same area is definitely a nice thing that he has access to. So yeah, I actually think Shield could be a really, really interesting place for him, and I might want to try that out at some point in the future, because I think Namor and him would make a pretty cool pairing. So yeah, that's not one I really expected to find as cool as I do, but I definitely like it. Another one I think that's actually really interesting for him is New Mutants. Of course, I won't be able to show their leadership here because it's not actually on Magic's card, but their leadership allows you to basically teleport allies within 3 up to an ally being attacked. And he definitely appreciates that a lot. He gets to teleport in, and then for their second attack, he can taunt it, so they won't be able to hit the original target, preventing the double tap. In a lot of cases, can keep some of the squishier models that they already have in their roster alive. So he definitely appreciates that. He gets to then get hit, aggressive up, and now he's gotten tons of distance outside of his own turn, and ideally is right where he wants to be to just kind of slash away with his axe. So yeah, I think this could be a really, really interesting place for him. Of course, he's going to be competing for that splash slot with models like Luke Cage or Red Guardian for kind of similar reasons. So yeah, he's got some competition in that splash slot, but he is a really, really cool piece, and I might try him out here when I get around to trying New Mutants, which is happening soon. Hopefully, I painted up my Warlock today, so looking forward to trying these guys out in the near future. But yeah, I think that's definitely an interesting place for him. And there we have Scourge. So yeah, at the end of the day, I think Scourge is a really, really fun piece. He's very, very straightforward. He wants to walk forward and he wants to stab stuff. You get into a little bit of complexity with when to use right-hand man and try to take advantage of the fact that you have a taunt on the character, but the character is not the bulkiest character in the world, so you got to be somewhat mindful of when you're using it. And of course, sometimes, the perfect plan and then dice happen and he goes down to an attack that he really shouldn't have. So it's not always something you can necessarily play around, but is a really interesting thing to kind of be aware of what types of attacks he wants to be right-hand manning and which ones he doesn't. And then kind of that other question of just like, is it worth losing Skurge here? Because Skurge will hit like a truck if he's got that range 2 already at the start of his turn, to keep, whatever other model alive. Or is that other model just so much more valuable, whether it's for objectives or maybe they hit even harder than he does or something like that. But as far as threes go, he's definitely one of the harder hitting threes in the game. I don't know if he's the hardest hitting. There's probably some, well, like Domino would probably be a harder hitting model than him, for example. But he's certainly up there. And I mean, with the 4 physical, he won't go down easily either. So that is always nice to have with him. He's also got stuff like aggressive to kind of stay in there when he needs to. So yeah, in general, I do really, really like Skurge. I think he's a lot of fun to play. And yeah, I think I've kind of said most of my thoughts on him at this point. So definitely let me know what you guys think down below. What kind of your synergies and strategies with Skurge are. Always curious to hear what you guys are doing with these characters. But that's going to do it for my thoughts. So I hope you guys have enjoyed. If you did, please do drop a like down below. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. Helps me out a bunch. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the stuff I'm throwing out here. But that's going to do it for this one. So until next time, have a great day, everybody. Peace.